Together, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger are becoming one nation.
3 African nations just started merging into one country. Wait, what does that even mean? A new flag? One army? A united government? Is Africa secretly building a superstate right under everyone's nose? Let's find out. For years, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger were defined by one constant: the presence of foreign soldiers on their soil. French convoys patrolled their streets, American drones hummed above their skies, and blue-helmeted UN peacekeepers stood watch in the background. These countries were treated as wards of the international security establishment, fragile states that couldn't stand on their own. That narrative was pushed hard, broadcast louder every time an insurgent attack happened or a coup erupted. But beneath that narrative, something else was growing: resentment. It wasn't just about pride, it was about reality. Despite decades of military assistance, the security situation in the Sahel had gotten worse. Entire regions were abandoned to armed groups. Rural towns fell under the control of insurgents. Villagers didn't feel protected. They felt occupied, not just by the militants, but by the very powers claiming to protect them. By 2020, the signs were already there. Malian citizens held protests against French troops. In Burkina Faso, communities demanded local control. In Niger, whispers grew louder about the US drone base in Agadez, one of the largest in the world, and how little it had changed things. People were asking hard questions. Why are they here? Why are we still dying? Why are our resources being flown out while we're told we're being helped? Then came the turning point. Between 2021 and 2023, all three nations experienced military takeovers. The Western media, in predictable fashion, called them coup regimes, illegitimate, and dangerous. But on the ground, something more complex was unfolding. The new leaders, Assimi Goïta in Mali, Ibrahim Traoré in Burkina Faso, and Abdourahmane Tiani in Niger, were young, defiant, and unafraid to say what their predecessors never could. Foreign occupation has failed us. One by one, they took radical action. Mali terminated its defense accords with France and asked UN troops to leave. Burkina Faso gave foreign military missions a deadline to vacate. Niger shocked the world in 2023 when it canceled long-standing agreements with both France and the US and grounded their military operations. These weren't gestures, they were declarations. For the first time in modern African history, a group of former colonies collectively ousted multiple superpowers. And here's the twist. The world expected chaos. Instead, something unexpected happened. Stability didn't collapse. Internal governance strengthened. Citizens rallied around their new leadership. The fear-mongering from the West, that these nations would implode without foreign boots, didn't match reality. Why? Because the presence of foreign troops had been a crutch, not a cure. Once that crutch was thrown away, these governments began looking inward, not just to replace what was lost, but to ask, what can we build in its place? That's when the idea of mutual self-reliance began to take form. Not isolation, not nationalism for nationalism's sake, but something smarter, coordination. The three leaders, having faced similar threats and made similar decisions, began to meet regularly. First behind closed doors, then in public summits. They weren't just comparing notes, they were laying bricks, joint defense pacts, shared intelligence, strategic realignment. The questions changed from, how do we replace the West, to, how do we create something of our own? The rejection of foreign forces wasn't the end, it was the spark, the moment when these nations stopped asking for help and started helping each other. It's no coincidence that the push for a unified military command followed shortly after. These countries had always fought the same battles, faced the same threats, and been divided by artificial colonial borders. Why not erase the lines and fight together? For decades, they were told they couldn't stand without foreign supervision. Now they were standing taller because they let go of it. But it wasn't enough to just coordinate defense. Once the trust was built on the battlefield, these nations asked a bigger question. If we can defend each other, why not govern together? And that's where this story takes a dramatic leap. From military alignment to political merger. From neighbors to nation builders. From foreign dependence to architects of a new state. Now that they had thrown out the occupiers, they had one thing they hadn't had in decades, a blank canvas. Away from external control, they walked into each other's arms. Because in the aftermath of that dramatic rejection, they found themselves not only free, but for the first time in modern history, facing the same direction. What began as a tactical defense pact soon turned into something far deeper. A political conversation between equals who had lived through the same betrayals, faced the same enemies, and inherited the same broken systems. And from that conversation, a new idea emerged, one that had been whispered for decades in the halls of Pan-Africanist thinkers but never truly tested in the real world. What if we stopped being separate states and started building a shared future, together, as one? This question wasn't abstract, it was practical. The three nations realized that their borders, drawn with a ruler in some European palace a century ago, had always been more imaginary than real. Ethnic groups, trade routes, and cultural ties crossed them freely. The people of Gao, Timbuktu, Dori, and Agadez spoke the same languages, shared customs, and often fought on the same side of the same conflicts. Why then, they asked, should our politics remain divided? Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. The push toward political union wasn't driven by utopian ideology. It was grounded in strategic necessity. Separate, they had fought in silos, repeated mistakes, and remained vulnerable to manipulation. Together, they could centralize decision-making, pool resources, and speak with a stronger voice, not just regionally, but globally. That's why, in early 2025, closed-door meetings became public declarations. The leaders didn't just sign another treaty or form another toothless regional body. They announced the formation of the Confederation of the Alliance of Sahel States, AES, a living, evolving political project aimed at eventually creating a single confederated state. The public response was electric. In Bamako, Ouagadougou, and Niamey, crowds gathered to hear speeches that sounded like history being written. Not the history of protests or coups or repressive regimes, the history of rebirth. The energy was different. It wasn't about anger anymore. It was about purpose. But symbolism wasn't enough. These leaders understood that political unity required real infrastructure. So they began to implement. A joint legislative framework was established, where shared laws on migration, border control, and trade were drafted in tandem, harmonized administrative procedures allowing for cross-border operations in agriculture, health, and education. Common diplomatic strategy, where AES representatives began attending international forums as a bloc, not as three splintered voices. Most powerful of all was the cultural signal, the unveiling of a joint national anthem. No anthem in Africa had ever served more than one state. This was uncharted territory. In a world where even regional unions struggled to agree on slogans, these three countries had composed and adopted a single song, one that would be sung by soldiers, children, and presidents alike. To many, this anthem wasn't just music. It was evidence, proof that what they were building was not an alliance, but a nation. Of course, skepticism existed. Western commentators rolled their eyes. Analysts warned of logistical chaos. Old guard African elites whispered that this would never last, that the egos of military men could never be contained within shared governance. But what those critics missed was that this movement wasn't being pushed down from palaces. It was rising from the ground up. The people had already begun treating the three nations as one. Goods flowed freely across borders. Local communities held joint festivals and regional markets. Youth groups in rural provinces began calling themselves Sahelians, rather than Burkinabe or Nigerians. On social media, hashtags like #1 Sahel and Sahel Unite spread faster than any government campaign ever could. And so, the political blueprint was no longer theory. It was reality in motion. Borders became bridges. Flags waved side by side, and where once there was only fragmentation, now there was coordination, rhythm, and momentum. But as these nations began to write laws together, govern together, and even sing together, another challenge emerged, perhaps the biggest one of all. Who controls the wealth? Because while politics can unite people, money is what tests that unity. With political trust now in place, the leaders of AES turned to the most dangerous and transformative question yet. What happens when we stop exporting our wealth and start owning it ourselves? The political unification of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger through the AES wasn't just a story of flags and anthems. It wasn't just soldiers marching in sync or presidents holding joint press conferences. That unity, built out of shared struggle and coordinated vision, inevitably pointed toward one question no state can afford to avoid. Who controls the wealth beneath our feet? Because beneath the deserts of Niger, the gold fields of Burkina Faso, and the rich earth of Mali lie not just minerals, but leverage, power, sovereignty. For decades, these riches were extracted under the illusion of partnership. Western companies, armed with colonial-era contracts and post-independence loopholes, shipped out uranium, gold, lithium, phosphate, and oil, while the host countries received crumbs in return. Infrastructure remained poor, schools unfunded, hospitals half-built. The people could see it. The wealth left, and they stayed poor. So now, with borders softening between them and governments thinking collectively, the next step was both logical and inevitable: resource realignment. Each AES nation had long been frustrated with the resource trap. In Niger, uranium, vital for France's nuclear energy grid, was extracted by French multinationals under deals that paid the state a fraction of market value. In Burkina Faso, gold was mined in bulk and flown out under tight security, while artisanal miners were left to dig with their hands and hope. In Mali, reports of lithium and oil exploration raised fears of a new era of resource exploitation dressed in the language of foreign investment. But now, things are changing. The new leadership understood that political sovereignty without economic sovereignty is just theater. You can't build an anthem out of borrowed mining contracts. You can't fund unity with foreign aid conditioned on silence. So, the AES states began rewriting the rules. First came license revocations. In Burkina Faso, under President Ibrahim Traoré, several foreign mining companies had their permits revoked outright. The justification? Failure to contribute to national development. But the message was broader. We're not here to be your extraction zones anymore. In Niger, a similar recalibration began. For decades, France's Orano, formerly Areva, had enjoyed sweetheart deals that allowed it to extract uranium at basement prices. The AES leadership declared that no contract would be valid unless it delivered visible benefits to the people. That meant higher royalties, local processing, and even the possibility of state-owned companies taking over operations completely. Mali, watching both neighbors lead, moved to enforce stricter export controls on unprocessed minerals. Government officials began crafting legal frameworks to mandate local value addition, a policy shift that could mean everything from building gold refineries to launching lithium battery production facilities inside Africa. And then came the bombshell, collective bargaining. Instead of each country negotiating deals in isolation, a model that had always benefited foreign corporations, the AES proposed a unified approach. A joint Natural Resources Commission was formed, pooling legal teams, technical advisors, and geopolitical analysts. The goal? Ensure that no contract signed in one AES country undermines the others. It's a move that not only prevents divide-and-conquer tactics, but creates the conditions for continent-wide price setting, something Africa has never had the power to do. As a symbol of this new direction, the AES leaders publicly proposed building a shared gold refinery within the next 3 years, one that could process the outputs of all three countries. It's not just a facility, it's a statement. Africa doesn't need to ship its wealth out raw anymore. That the days of watching billions leave in containers while locals count pennies are coming to an end. And the world is noticing. Western financial media call it resource nationalism, using the term like it's a disease. Multinational companies are beginning to express concern over the business climate. But those critiques reveal more than they hide. Because they confirm what the AES has suspected for years, foreign partners were never afraid of instability. They were afraid of independence. Still, the leaders know that reclaiming resources is only part of the story. Minerals must be processed. Energy must be harnessed. Roads, rails, and trade corridors must be built to link their economies in a meaningful way. Because if wealth is to stay in Africa, it must move inside Africa, not just out of it. And that brings them to their next realization. Now that they're producing together, building together, and defending their wealth, they must decide how to trade together. But to trade, you need partners who respect your direction, not punish it. Which is why their eyes are turning outward again, not toward the West, but toward their neighbors. Because the next question is, who's joining this movement and who's trying to stop it? Let's begin with Ghana. Long seen as a beacon of democracy and Western partnership in West Africa, Ghana had always played it safe. It hosted U.S. military cooperation, it maintained strong trade ties with the EU, and it remained firmly inside ECOWAS, often serving as a bridge between Africa and its former colonial partners. But as the AES bloc gained momentum, Ghana faced a dilemma. Domestically, frustration was growing. Youth unemployment was rising. Mining companies continued to dominate the economy, while local communities remained impoverished. Public trust in foreign investment had eroded, and many Ghanaians were watching the AES countries with something new in their eyes: envy. Not of their instability, but of their boldness. And then, in early 2025, Ghana made a quiet but monumental move. It appointed a formal ambassador to the AES states, not to Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger individually, but to the Confederation as a bloc. It was a diplomatic innovation and a powerful gesture. It meant Ghana recognized the AES as a single political entity. It meant Ghana was considering something dangerous to the Western order: alignment. That's when the backlash came. Within weeks of that appointment, the U.S. State Department revised its travel advisory for Ghana, raising it from Level 1 exercise normal precautions to Level 2 exercise increased caution. The justification: alleged rising threats to women and travelers in Ghana's northern regions. But no new incident reports were cited. No major policy changes had occurred, and the timing, coming directly after Ghana's overture to AES, was suspiciously perfect. To many observers, this wasn't a coincidence. It was pressure, the old kind. Soft power turned passive-aggressive. Ghana was being warned. Align too closely with the Sahel rebels, and you may find yourself punished, diplomatically and economically. But Ghana didn't back down. Instead, its president publicly reaffirmed his commitment to dialogue with all African partners, a veiled rejection of foreign micromanagement. Soon after, high-level delegations from Accra visited Ouagadougou and Niamey. Talks reportedly covered port access, joint rail lines, and trans-border trade agreements. Ghana, which borders the Atlantic, could become the AES bloc's gateway to the sea. But Ghana wasn't the only one tilting. In Central Africa, another unexpected player was drawing closer: Chad. Unlike Ghana, Chad had never been a darling of Western democracy circles. It had long been ruled with a firm hand, relied heavily on French military support, and remained under the radar internationally. But in 2025, something snapped. After the U.S. placed restrictions on Chadian nationals entering the U.S., Chad's government responded with a stunner. It banned all U.S. citizens from entering Chad and revoked visas of those already in the country. The move wasn't just rare, it was unprecedented. And it wasn't about tit-for-tat travel policy. It was about dignity. Chad's president, in a national address, declared that Chadians will no longer accept selective respect from their partners. He didn't mention AES directly, but his next actions spoke volumes. Chad invited all three AES leaders for a regional summit, praised their anti-imperialist positions, and publicly committed to studying the Confederation model for future cooperation. To diplomats, this was code. Chad, long considered part of France's post-colonial security zone, was now flirting with the other side. And that's what AES had become: a side. Not just a coalition, not just a bloc. A side in a growing continental divide between countries still clinging to the Western framework and those building a new order, one based on autonomy, respect, and internal cooperation. To diplomats, this was code. Chad, long considered part of France's post-colonial security zone, was now flirting with the other side. And that's what AES had become: a side, not just a coalition, not just a bloc. A side in a growing continental divide between countries still clinging to the Western framework and those building a new order, one based on autonomy, respect, and internal cooperation. The more successful AES became in asserting control over its economy, the more neighboring countries began to reconsider their positions. Ghana and Chad are just two examples. Guinea, Togo, and even Cameroon have shown signs of reevaluating their external dependencies. And with each new nation that draws closer, the AES becomes more than an alliance. It becomes a zone of influence, a philosophy of governance, and for many African citizens, a symbol of dignity. So, can anything now undo AES? Can we call it the strongest alliance present in Africa? Let us know in the comments section. Will this lead to Pan-Africanism? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.